Welcome to Executives at the Edge, a podcast brought to you by MEF. I'm your host, Pascal Menezes. Join me as we explore thought-provoking perspectives from the leaders and changemakers who are propelling enterprise digital transformation forward. Well, I'm really super excited to have April Taylor, president of Esther Tech. Today's going to be a fascinating topic. We're going to cover a lot about how do service providers build with each other? How do they work together in a supply chain? How do they actually handle the quoting process and make it all frictionless to the user or the enterprise consumer? And really, there's a lot of challenges involved. So stay tuned. This episode is going to be very exciting. So with that, April, I would love to hear a little bit more about your background. I know our listeners would love to hear about that, and also about Esther Tech.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for having me, Pascal. In my background, I have 20 years in the telecom space, really started in the cost audit revenue assurance space to make sure that the complexity of the telecom intercarrier billing is being accurately reflected on invoices. So going back from, 20 years ago, we've saved $1 billion for our clients over that time. Just making sure that what you've negotiated in your contracts is what's actually coming out on an invoice. And there's so much intricacy involved in that and nuance that we've just kind of amassed over time the unique and specific subject matter expertise for that space. And what we're doing at Esther Tech is we're taking that subject matter expertise and we're complementing it with a self-hosted agnostic AI. So it allows us to deliver value at a fraction of the cost. We use a lot of different LLMs. They all have their own strengths, but really we focus primarily on private LLMs. And that allows us to, through prompt engineering and training, really take the nuance of our understanding of how these transactions should work and apply it into an automated AI engine. So that's kind of what we've been doing. We really see that there's going to be this new software layer that leverages AI to replace legacy systems that have existed in the telecom industry. So that's kind of where we started, what we're doing, and where we see the industry going.
Well, that's pretty fascinating. So let me just recap. So we're talking about, you came from an issue where billing, you talked about. I'm talking about, I think at this point for our listeners, when a customer comes to a provider, the providers sometimes have to interact with other providers worldwide. And there are billings that they have to work together between provider to provider. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So it's not the enterprise or the customer to the service provider. It's the ecosystem itself has a billing kind of challenge, and that's kind of where you came from. So can you tell us, what's the most pressing issue that service providers are facing today?
Yeah, so service providers today are facing intense pricing pressures driven by market disruptors in this connectivity space. So it's reshaping competition, and it's starting to challenge some of the traditional revenue models. These customers expect high quality connectivity at lower costs. We've seen some new entrants to the connectivity space like LEO satellites and hyperscalers that are very agile and they leverage innovative technologies. So, thinking like Starlink, AWS, Google Cloud, and they're just challenging the traditional telecom infrastructure with satellite and cloud-based services. And it's pressuring telecoms to offer connectivity at much lower margins. So these service providers are facing a very delicate balance between covering high capital fiber expenditures with keeping prices affordable, especially as disruptors are offering alternatives. So the service provider's ability to adapt to these disruptions will be critical to succeeding in a rapidly evolving connectivity landscape.
You're absolutely right. Leo, I mean, the world's changing rapidly. The hyperscalers have gone in with all kinds of WAN offerings, and Google just announced theirs recently. Leo has become huge. Certainly Starlink has been the poster child for that, but many, many companies are jumping into the Leo space. And now we even have the ability to our phones be directly attached to these Leo satellites that we can use them. So that's pretty amazing for broadband on our phones. And what I'm understanding, though, is that the challenge, I guess, comes from this pricing pressure. So what exactly are you solving? What do you solve then with Esther Tech to solve these problems?
So our goal is to help service providers lower their operational costs by leveraging automated systems to eliminate manual processes and streamline their operations. We're seeing carriers looking to AI to help with that, and then also solutions that are automated, like a quote to cash solution. Those are going to offer significant, both AI and these quote to cash solutions are offering significant results and reducing manual processes. And they're eliminating the time-intensive process of resolving invoice disputes, and they're speeding the time to payment of those invoices by up to 6 months in some situations.
So let me try to recap. So let's take the use case. So what you're saying is, in the past, and maybe you can walk through the process, these guys use very manual processes and they go after MSAs, right? Master standing agreements, I think is the terminology. And basically they work off these things. There are manual processes where they do email sometimes, or they do proprietary APIs and so on. But a lot of times you have to go against some agreement they've agreed, and there's a lot of disputes, and did I really do that, or so on. And what you're saying is, because there's this interconnection of the ecosystem to make this all available globally, there has to be finally the ability to then reconcile and say, okay, what do I owe each other in the ecosystem? And in the past, that was riddled full of complexities and disputes. And now you've found a way through AI to make that fully automated and remove a lot of disputes potentially to zero and have the ability to settle. Is that correct? Do I have it right?
Yes, that's exactly correct. So for quote to cash, we are looking at an end-to-end automated system that gives you efficiency, accuracy, visibility throughout the life cycle of the service. And MEF has really been on the forefront of this initiative with our project that we've been working on for W170. So we've been working to standardize a quote-to-cash data model with key attribute validations infused at each point in the life cycle, from quote to order to inventory to invoice to settlement. So we're minimizing errors in pricing, inventory, and billing. And in the end, you have this transparency through real-time data, accurate billing, and then seamless payment. So the complexity of the telecom invoicing that has existed forever really has to be addressed. And I think that, some of these disruptors are capitalizing on simplicity. And I think we have to be able to kind of meet that challenge and meet that moment by also having a solution that is very simple.
So you talk about quote to cash. I don't think our listeners understand when you mean, we described the use case before. What do you mean by quote to cash?
So if you are purchasing a service, a product or a service from another carrier, so this is wholesale space, but I do think that, just as a kind of side note, that the wholesale space sets the tone for the industry. So if we can figure out creating really simple, accurate, seamless interactions at the wholesale level, that will eventually trickle down to the enterprise level. And then everybody will be able to benefit from this technology. But so what we're doing is we're following that service that's being purchased all the way through the life cycle. So MEF has all of these incredible APIs, standardized APIs that can be used to transact between these two parties. But each piece of the life cycle is almost like its own little silo. So what we're trying to do is stitch them all together with those validation points throughout and saying, between these two phases of the life cycle, we really think that these attributes have to be reconciled at this point in the life cycle. So between quote and order, if there's a discrepancy there, that discrepancy is going to ultimately end up on an invoice that ends up getting disputed. So if we can infuse those validation points all the way in every step of the life cycle, then ultimately you have an invoice that's already been pre-validated, pre-agreed to, and settlement can happen very quickly then on that invoice.
So if I can just recap the use case. So an enterprise comes to a provider and says, hey, Mr. Provider, I have sites all over the world, and can you service these sites, right? So the first thing is the provider says, sure, and this is all done through portals or APIs, right? In the past, it was done through people. So they come in and they say, okay, you're on my sites. Can you give me a quote for these sites? So these sites have addresses. And the addresses say, okay, well, what services do you want on these addresses? You want IP, wavelengths, carry Ethernet, blah, 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 right? And so they describe the service they want at these addresses. And then basically they want a quote, right? Like anybody wants a quote. Someone comes to your house and says, hey, give me a quote for renovating my house. So you get a quote, right? So that's, I think what you're describing is that whole process is a life cycle, right? And I think that's kind of in essence what you're saying.
Yeah. So to deliver connectivity to a worldwide customer, your service provider only has physical fiber, or they're only able to provide that service in certain areas. So to give the full portfolio connectivity, they are going to other partner service providers and saying, can you give me a quote for just this little piece, and then I can pick it up on my network and we have the rest covered. But so that's kind of the wholesale use case for why they're going outside of their own company to go buy pieces of that to be able to serve the whole customer end to end, no matter where their location is. And then those business transactions that are happening inter-carrier, so between two carriers, are very complex, have a lot of issues. Like you said, they're governed by the master service agreement. And, those can be thousands of pages long with hundreds of amendments and all of the complexity that happens there. But what we're saying is if we can pick it up at the point of the quote and then follow it through the life cycle and agree at different points throughout the life cycle that this is what it's going to look, this is what's being quoted, this is what's being ordered, this is what's being recorded in the inventory, and then this is ultimately what will appear on an invoice, then the actual settlement piece of it, when it comes time to pay that invoice, it's very simple and there's not disputes.
Now, you started the episode saying that sometimes there's billions of dollars of disputes in it because of the manual process. So let's look at the old process and then what you're trying to do here. So the old way was there was these master service agreements. I think I call it standing agreements, but anyways, they're service agreements. And basically these MSAs represent what the two carriers have agreed upon. And basically when the carriers say, okay, give me a quote to the other partner ecosystem and supply chains, they go about it in either manual or preferably an automated process so you get it right away. In the old days, it was manual. It could take 6 months to get back a quote. So customers are going like, where's my quote? Oh, still working on it, right? But now with APIs and MEF-CECP APIs, we can do that instantly. Okay, good. But even if we can get that instantly and get a quote back, they're still working off the way they bill to each other is old. And there's a lot of disputes, can be billions of dollars. And sometimes you have people that go against each other saying, well, no, I didn't really order that, and so on. Can you help us with that? And so after that whole quote process, how does that billing dispute now get resolved through the technology you're proposing?
Yeah, so in each point of the life cycle, so between the quote and the order, there can be things that change or there can be discrepancies that happen. And if we don't address them at the time that they're happening, and we are only realizing that this discrepancy exists 3 months down the road when we see an invoice for an amount that we were not expecting, then it creates a dispute. So we want to make sure that between the quote and the order, that what's appearing on the order is this exact thing that was quoted. And if there are changes, we're addressing it at that time. And then what is on the order is actually what goes into the inventory. And then what's in the inventory is actually what goes onto an invoice. So we're trying to build these blocks throughout the life cycle where every party involved in that transaction is agreeing at each point in the life cycle, yes, this is the quote that I agreed to. Yes, this is the resultant order that came from that quote. And this is the proper service being ordered. And this is the proper amount. And then, this is what we're seeing for our inventories. And then, ultimately from that inventory, being able to have an accurate invoice produced.
And this in the past, this has been challenging when I want to suddenly change the bandwidth, right? If I suddenly say, okay, across all these sites, I suddenly want to up my bandwidth for nights to do backups, and during the day, I want to go down to these lower bandwidths. That's not really possible in the ecosystem because of this billing issue. Yes, APIs of MEF-CECP can do that, and they can up and down and change the resource and be elastic in nature. But then it becomes to the billing, it becomes, whoa, I don't know how to bill on these changes of bandwidth happening on a daily basis or so on policy basis. Is that kind of also a big challenge that now gets solved?
I do think so. I would have to understand a little bit more about where, when those bandwidth changes are being requested, how they're doing it. Is a new quote being requested for that? And it's very different in the US versus in the international space. So in the US, you would have to issue a new ASR to change that bandwidth. And ASRs have, certain time frames that they're allowed before they actually deliver. So it's definitely not, if I request it today, by tonight, I'll have that additional bandwidth. There's significant delays introduced just by that process. But ultimately, if they're able to, I think with network as a service, they're going to have to be able to provision or physically provide that bandwidth in an elastic way. And once they're able to do that, then we can say, okay, so how do we order that bandwidth then? Like, what is the conversation that has to happen between the two companies to actually turn it up quickly like that? But the goal would be for all of this to be flowing, if it has to be a new quote or whatever it is, that it would then be able to follow the same process that we've put all of the other services in.
Well, very fascinating. In April, you've been involved with MEF for a long time and started with, a lot of the blockchain smart contracts. So is smart contracts and blockchains being used in your solutions, or is it all just AI and the kind of smart contracts and blockchains are now not needed anymore because AI can do it all? Or does it all come together with AI?
I do think right now, blockchains still hold a really important place in all of this, in the overall solution, because ultimately what we need is what we call mutual endorsement. So we need both parties to be able to agree on a piece of data, whether that's an amount or whatever it is. And there needs to be a record of that agreement. That's the only way to eliminate disputes. We have never had technology that could eliminate disputes in the past. So blockchain was the first thing that we saw, and we said, okay, if we have a single source of truth versus two data silos, then we can mutually endorse that record and it will eliminate the dispute. There's, it's immutable. You can't change it once you've mutually endorsed it. So I do think that blockchain still has a place in this overall solution, but I will be interested to see how AI and agentic AI evolves to see if that continues to, if there is something that AI could mimic that's similar to a blockchain solution. But as of right now, the blockchain solution is the only available option to have a ledger that is being mutually endorsed by all of the parties of that transaction.
But maybe, in the past, we've been talking about smart contracts, which basically take the MEF APIs of the quote and ordering, and these smart contracts codify the transactions saying, okay, well, you said you did a transaction. I agreed on the transaction. We agree on the transaction. Here's a transaction number. And we put that in the blockchain. And then we basically stamp the transaction with some kind of crypto keys that says, no, you can't, it's truly that transaction. So it's immutable and you can't repudiate it, correct? So that's kind of the idea. But what can emerge to the idea is that maybe we don't need smart contracts. Maybe we have two AI agents that are acting like more evolved smart contracts that are talking to each other, saying, yep, that transaction's real, but then they still have to stamp a transaction on the blockchain because someone has to say, hey, as a distributed ledger that, hey, that transaction, when I go to bill on it, we both agreed on it. So I think maybe the smart contracts evolve to be kind of AI agents and the blockchain still stays there as a distributed ledger model. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually, that's a great summary of where we will be headed in really the near future. So the old way that we were able to implement smart contracts was by taking paper contracts and converting it into code, and then allowing that code to auto execute and on a blockchain, and then record or stamp the record of the transaction on a blockchain. Now, AI has such a huge role in that. We can put a contract into a private AI and ask the private AI to codify the terms of that contract. So a lot of, and then, we still could put it in a traditional smart contract, or it can evolve to have the AI itself be the agents and they're just recording on the blockchain a record that a transaction happened.
So April, at the end of the day, what does all of this mean that we just talked about to the industry?
So standardized APIs, ledgers, and AI are going to lay the groundwork for a unified data foundation and intelligent automation. And by reducing errors and operational inefficiencies, these technologies will help service providers reduce their operational costs and maintain competitive pricing in today's challenging landscape.
Yeah, and we could go on and on blockchains. I think most of those listeners would be very fascinated on this whole blockchain idea because we always think of it as using, Bitcoin and so on, but blockchain is much more than just Bitcoin. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. We're much over. So maybe we'll spend another episode talking about blockchains and how they operate and all that. But again, thank you, April. It was a really fascinating topic, and I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Pascal. Appreciate you having me.
Thanks for joining us for Executives at the Edge. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe today. Share online a review. Find all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform and at MEF.net.